Hi, MassArt. I can't believe we're here at the last week. I have a lot of review today, but I am going to first start with reviewing the requirements for the catalog project and how I would lay that out. We should be laying out the tabloid project or the catalog project onto letter size paper, vertical letter size paper. And I'm going to grab the artboard tool and make 8 new artboards. I think 8 is the least amount of artboards I've ever seen anyone complete this project with. Using only 4 artboards would mean just a front cover, a back cover, and the interior centerfold. So still with the artboard tool, I'm going to nudge the artboards together that are going to be touching in the way that the book is organized. And this will be my front cover, this will be my back cover, and these are my center fold pages. So for my front cover, I could throw my logo on there. I would probably also get a nice graphic to go behind it. I've saved a quick JPEG of a mood board I make a little bit later on in this video. And then the rest of these pages would have the front and backs of your outfits. And these could be all arranged beautifully with your descriptions on each of these pages. If you would like, you could have another spread. Right? Any of these pages will be together and would make an interesting spot for having a complete photograph. Crop the image. Right, and then we could have a back cover with some kind of ending message, or I've seen people put all of the fabric options on the back cover, or you could definitely have more pages than this. I've seen people get really creative with this collection or with this project. I found a fun background image. I'm going to make its own layer to put it on so it won't interfere with anything else right now. And we'll make it nice and small. This would look beautiful with the texture of the garments on top of it, especially if I made these have some beautiful knit textures or whatever to support the fall vibe. So hopefully the layout of the magazine is making sense, and hopefully you guys do a better job than this. I suppose I could throw this on the back and front too. And that actually should line up pretty seamlessly because it's the right size. I could make this outer shape a little bit transparent. And make it a warmer color. And things are starting to get there. Adding in the text will be great. But hopefully this is making sense. Let me know if you have any questions this week about the layout. It's should be the last thing that you have to do for homework. The rest of this video is going to be review, 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 so maybe just put it on the background while you're working. The main difference between Photoshop and Illustrator is that Photoshop is a raster program and Illustrator is a vector program. Now this is illustrating the difference between raster images and vector images, which is that raster images are made of pixels. So when you zoom in on a raster image, it lowers the quality and you end up seeing the pixels when it's zoomed in. When you draw with a vector program, you can scale the images to any size and it will always look as high quality because vector images, I always say that they are made of math. They are made of a special type of curve which kind of stores how far and in what direction the curve goes at every point and allows you to have such a smooth image at any size. So these are the two main type of raster or of image files, the two main type of image files. So Photoshop is a raster program, and if we draw with the paintbrush tool in Photoshop, it's automatically on this brush stroke, and you'll notice I'm automatically drawing on the background. We wouldn't be able to move this. This is now on the white of the background, and this is a fine way to work. Some people work this way all on one layer in Photoshop when they're painting with the brush tools. But it's probably better to make new layers. So you can come down to the new button in the layer panel. My Photoshop might look a little bit different than your Photoshop. All of these are customizable. All of these panels are customizable. So I can pop them out. I can hold them, hover them over here, and pop them back in. Each of these is a panel. I can choose to have my panels look three different ways. They can be expanded into words, they can be really small, just symbols, and I can also choose to display them as the whole panel themselves in a second column. I like to maximize screen space, so I recently reorganized so that my layer panel, because I tend to work with lots and lots of layers in Photoshop, my layer panel is the biggest panel and it's on the right, and my other panel, I collapse it with this little arrow, and I like it to be just icons so that I can see as much of the artwork as possible. And I just am familiar with what all of these panels are and what I need. So I've kind of customized it for what I need. There are dozens of different panels and they are available under the icon window. Right now, layers is the only one checked because it's the only one that's like actively open like this. But if we expand all of these and I go to window, you'll see that I have swatches checked, patterns, libraries, layers, character styles, and you might not use any of those. You might just use the layer panel and tools in Photoshop because that's kind of how I functioned for a long time. I use the layer panels, tools, and adjustment layers. At the top of Photoshop is the Properties panel, and this changes depending on what tool you have. So right now I have the Brush tool out, and right now I'm drawing on layer 1. And if I switch to the Move tool up here, and everything comes with like a little description of how to use it if you hover over it for long enough. If I switch to the Move tool, I'll get a different set of options. The most important option for the Move tool is Auto Select. So right now, Auto Select is unchecked, so it's what the Move tool moves is dependent on layer 1 and is dependent on what is selected in my layer panel, excuse me. So layer 1 is selected, so that's all that's going to move. Even if I'm clicking over here in white space, I am only moving what I've drawn on layer 1. The layers work like sheets of acetate that move over each other, and you can add as many layers as you want, and they will all kind of function independently. So the background layer is locked right now. It gave me an error message when I tried to use the Move tool on it. If I click on the lock, I will be able to move it, and we will be able to see the transparent white space that is behind the background layer. If I want to start over and want a new background layer, if I want to put a new color in the background, I can use the Fill tool, which will fill with a new color. So we'll fill it with the pure white again. This is the foreground color and the background color. The foreground color is generally the color that tools use unless you've changed settings somewhere. And if you want to be on the standard foreground color and background color, you can click on the black and white dot there. So right now this would fill, I have to make a new layer, and I'm going to fill this whole layer with black, but that's a little jarring, so fill with white. It'll fill with whatever layer, whatever color is in the front there. You can change the color with the color panel or the swatches panel, or if you're over here and you want to, you can just double click and this panel pops up. It popped up on my second screen. And you can pick a new color and adjust all of these settings. That's handy for if I wanted the same tone of green, but I wanted it to be a little darker. Double clicking, getting the color picker, you can set it just to brightness, and then you can lower the brightness on this slider and it will just add more black to the image, and then we could use that as a brush. The brush options up here, this option here is there for the eraser, and it's also there for some of the other tools like the clone tools, and this changes your brush type. So right now I'm on soft round pressure size. I could put it on hard round pressure size. Even though this looks a lot sharper and a lot more like the vector image I discussed in the last slide, when I zoom in on that image, it will still have pixels. You will still be able to eventually see pixels and a soft edge. We can use the pencil tool as well, and there's a subtle difference between the brush tool and the pencil tool, which is that the brush tool adds a soft layer on the edge of transition pixels, transitionary gray pixels, and this does not. So they're both still made of pixels, but the brush tool is generally softer. what's great about the pencil tool is that if you needed to, you could select every single pixel with the magic wand tool. The magic wand tool adjusts, or the magic wand tool selects pixels based on color. We can check off contiguous, which means it will only select this shape, and even if the tolerance were on 0, it would select every single pixel, and we would be able to fill it with the background color. You can select the background color again using the eyedropper tool and see it filled the foreground color with it. And if I want to save this green and this green, I can swap and choose the foreground color. You can also save swatches just like in Illustrator. You can choose plus, this panel comes up, and we can choose OK, and there's my saved color swatch. I can get rid of that easily. So some people like the pencil tool for some applications, but it's pretty specific. Let's make a quick collage. So I have some images that I've been collecting that I could assemble into a process book, and I have been getting some of these from sources which allow for large photographs. So let me try this one. So if you source images from like Pexels, or I can't remember the other one right now, but Pexels.com is the one that's coming to mind. They include really large images, and so while this is selected, and I haven't actually applied this image yet at all, it's still, when you bring an image in from a file, it automatically comes in kind of free transform mode, so I can still scale it. And actually, if we look up at the top, we can tell that this image is only 19% of the size of the page. This page was set up to be 11 by 17 at 300 pixels per inch, and resolution is important in Photoshop. You have to work in the right resolution the whole time. That has to do with the pixels in the image. It won't be high quality when you go to print it if you're working in low resolution. So I know that this image won't be blurry because up here it says that I am only at 20% of the size that this image could be at this resolution. So it's a really large image. I think I got it from Pexels. So we need to delete these other layers because they were just example layers. And we need to notice that this is a smart object. Smart objects are not traditional pixels. If I tried to draw on this layer, it would give me an error message. It must be rasterized before proceeding. And then it asks me right away if I want to rasterize the smart object. And honestly, I don't have to for this one. If I want this to be the whole background image, then that's fine. That's like what will... it won't bother anything as long as I don't need to edit that. It won't bother anything for this to be a smart object. The smart objects are actually, they are higher quality overall, right? If I needed to resize this, if I decided midway through the project that I wanted to scale it up to just focus on the bed in this image, I could do that because it's a smart object. I would still know that it's only 33% of the image, and it's still tied, the smart object is still tied to the file, so it hasn't lost any pixels by being rasterized to a specific size. Rasterize makes it into pixels, which means it's trapped at a specific size, and then if you try to scale it after it's been rasterized, it can get pixelated. Alright, let's grab this, and we're going to cut out the cocoons out of this image, and we're going to try to do it using my favorite combination of tools lately. They automatically come in free transform mode. If you ever want to enter free transform mode again, you hit Control T, or you can go to Edit Transform, edit free transform, and the cross and the handles will show up, and you'll be able to scale everything. So my favorite combination of tools is now the object selection tool, and then I probably use the polygonal lasso tool in order to kind of clean up. This is in lasso mode. There are two different modes for the quick selection tool or the object selection tool. There's the lasso mode and there's the rectangle mode. So with rectangle mode, I would just have to draw a rectangle around them. But with it put into lasso mode up here in the properties panel, we can select around just the parts that we need, and it does its best. This isn't 100% perfect 100% of the time. It's just doing its best to kind of stick to differences it sees in color. So we're going to go in and help it using the polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to use Control+ to zoom in. Right now, this is selected, and we don't want it to be selected. We only want the butterfly and the cocoons to be selected and not the background. So I held Alt and I got this little minus sign next to my cursor, and then I started clicking around. And the polygonal lasso tool, it only makes zigzags or straight line segments. You don't have to make zigzags with them. It doesn't make curves. If you want to go backwards, you can hit delete. If you click close enough together with it, you will essentially give the effect of a curve. Okay, so back here, I'm just coming back to the beginning, and I'm looking for this little circle next to my cursor, and I click, and I have deselected that section. So I'll do that just for this little section. You can also double click to end the circle. And for this section, I'm holding Shift because I want to add their antenna into the selection. In Photoshop selection tools, for all of them, Shift adds and Alt subtracts. Right? There are three sections of selection tools: the rectangle and elliptical tools, the lasso tools, and the various lasso tools and the various like quick selection, magic selection tools. So we were using the quick selection tool. We went over the magic wand tool earlier, but it selects all of the same color on the page. And in this case, we use the object selection tool, which for mood boards, I think is just killer. So if we want to, we can rasterize this image and remove the background, and that's the way that I generally teach in class to beginners. But in a second, we're also going to talk about another option for keeping this as a smart object. But right now, let's turn it into pixels, and we will go to select inverse, right? Because if we hit delete right now, we would delete the part that we want to keep because that's the part that we have selected, but it's built into Photoshop that we can choose select inverse and then hit delete out here. Photoshop is really good at working with pixels. So if we want to move this into another spot but keep it on the same layer as its partner here, we can select around it with one of our selection tools and then move to one of the move tools, and we can kind of maybe overlap. Maybe. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and leave these on the same layer and deselect. So I'm going to hit Control D, or you can go to Select, Deselect, Control D. And now these are their own layer. Interestingly, it did not delete the outside. That's pretty typical if you've made the image larger than the page, that some stuff gets left over on the outside. Sometimes I just take the eraser tool and I erase the outside if I need to move it somewhere else, but right now I think I'll just hit Control Z until it's back in that spot. I did kind of want it a little bit over, but it doesn't look like it left any pixels on the left side, so I'm lucky that way. It could have brought in a line of pixels that I would have had to delete. Okay, let's bring in one more image, and then we'll move on to our Illustrator review. But if we want to include an image of some textiles or some fashion image here, but we don't know, we want to select her when she's nice and big and easy to select, but we don't know if we're going to keep her this size, or maybe we want her even bigger. Maybe she ends up being like really small on the page, and we know that there are more pixels available in the space. Actually, there aren't that many more in this one. This is at 90% of its size, but we can still go a tiny bit bigger. Anyway, if you want the flexibility of being able to change the size of the image and not worry about pixels as much, you still have to be conscious of it. We can select around her, and let's try using the object selection tool. Perfect. There's just like one moment here where I'm going to clean up. I'm going to hold Shift. So we are going to use a layer mask instead of removing the background pixels permanently. We're going to use a layer mask. Layer masks are made by selecting the layer and then coming down to this symbol, and we instantly have hidden the background. The background is not moved. It is hidden by the layer mask, and we can see the layer mask in this little thumbnail next to the layer. I wonder, can I make these any bigger? No. can continue to adjust the layer mask, and that's why this is another, it's kind of a more flexible, it's just a more flexible way in general of removing the backgrounds of images. So if we choose the brush tool, and we'll make it a small manageable size, and this works especially well if you have like uh, a Wacom tablet or a brush, in which case I would be choosing hard round pressure size in Photoshop, and this would, like, if I press, I'll make a new layer to demonstrate. If I press really hard with it, it's going to make a thick line, and if I only touch light, it makes a thin line. That's what pressure size means in the brush options. On the thumbnail layer, if I have this selected, I can adjust what the layer is hiding by drawing on the layer with black. If I draw on the layer with the eraser tool, it will add to what it is showing on the in terms of what the layer mask is showing or hiding, right? So drawing with the brush tool adds, I'll make it a little bigger, and erasing, you have to draw in black with the brush tool. Erasing on this layer adds. So it's kind of a way to erase the image without removing any of the pixels, right? We can erase her eye, or draw on her eye actually with the black, and then using the eraser tool erases the black that we've drawn. And you can see it reflected in this little thumbnail. If we erase her whole head, you will see in the thumbnail she doesn't have any head. So I'm going to hit undo, and we can just clean up some of the edges instead. And I'm just pressing really lightly with my brush tool to do that, but you can also just use a much smaller brush. You can also right click to adjust the brush size and access the brush option panel. Right click is often a good thing to check out what it does for each tool. So now we can adjust this image as long as it's linked to the layer mask. If you accidentally unlink it, or if you unlink it for whatever reason, they'll move separately, but as long as that link is there, we can hit Control T or go to Edit Transform, and we can scale this, and kind of, it does start showing 100% up here because the layer mask is at 100%, but it still will show, if we like unlink these and do Control T, we can see that the image itself is only at 99%. And we can actually move her separately from her layer mask, which is something that sometimes you want to do in certain situations, like if you were using a pattern there or a texture and you wanted to find the right spot. But let's link her again. If I wanted to make a rectangle in Photoshop, there is a rectangle tool, and it has a couple options. You can either choose to draw a rectangle that's made of pixels, a shape, or a rectangle that's made of paths. I normally just make rectangles that are made of pixels. They're the ones that I understand the best. And if we draw this shape, it will fill with a rectangle, and then it'll just fill with the foreground color. We're going to compare this to how we make rectangles in Illustrator. Let's actually use this rectangle, and we are going to change the opacity layer on it. Let's find one that is doing something interesting. Yeah, so a nice soft light that can give a nice border to a mood board. Mood boards don't have to be overly complex. So this is an 11 by 17 inch page in Illustrator. It has, in this setup, it has pretty much the same layout as Photoshop. When you first launch Illustrator, it's probably going to be on a layout called Essentials. Essentials puts all of your properties, all of your panels at the side, and there is no properties panel at the top. I am much less familiar with this layout, but it really is almost the same, except that your properties panel is always on the right. I like to work in layout because it makes Photoshop and Illustrator feel a lot similar. You're always looking up towards the property panel when you have a new tool or object selected. So this is how I tend to encourage you to work, and it's how I teach. When we draw a rectangle in Illustrator, we are going to find that its color is dependent on the fill and the stroke over here. So in Illustrator, the colors in your tool panel are the fill, which is going to be the inside of the object, and the stroke, which is going to be the outside of the object. So if we click and drag, we can see basically just a black line. But if I switch to my black selection tool, which is the tool that allows us to move whole objects, this arrow does moving of individual anchor points. We move our black selection tool and move it off of the artboard, which you're also allowed to do in Illustrator, unlike Photoshop. We can see that it is filled with white. So let's change some of these colors. You can change them either by double clicking on them or by choosing a new color in the Swatches panel. If I choose a new color right now, it's going to change the fill color because the fill is on the front of this stack of two that is the fill and the stroke panel. So if I click, it fills with green and it's still got a black outline. If we want to change the outline color, I just need to click once actually to bring whichever one I want to change to the front. So click once on the stroke and then we can choose a new color with this selected with the black selection tool. We choose a new color. And if we come up to the properties panel, this is where we can make the stroke thicker if we want. We can change the color up here in the properties panel as well. The fill and the stroke. The stroke always has a hole in the center of it because it's just the outline color. We can change the thickness width profile of the stroke. So if we want things to get a little crazy, this is great for moments that you want to be a little bit more Illustrator or like have a little look like they have a little bit more of the hand in them. Having things get thick and thin is always great. You can also choose from whatever brushes you have loaded into your file, and you can change the opacity of the whole object. And all kinds of other options. So the panels in Illustrator are very similar to the panels in Photoshop, and in that way pretty similar to panels in a lot of other Adobe programs. I can either have them be words or plain symbols, or I can choose to expand them into their actual libraries. Again, in order to conserve screen space, I really like them to be small, and I get familiar with what all of these panels mean. And if I ever forget and I'm like, which one of those is the appearance panel, I can go to Window and choose Appearance, and there's my appearance panel. If you ever want to make the inside of the shape if you ever want to make the inside of the shape transparent and not the outside, right? If we lower this, the whole shape gets transparent, which isn't always, it's not always what we want. I'm putting it over the edge so you can see what I mean. If you ever want to make just the inside transparent, we'll raise that, and we can change the opacity in the appearance panel. So I'm going to choose fill and then click on opacity, and we can lower the opacity of just the fill. This is great for when you're drawing flats and you need to illustrate a transparent fabric with only one shape, essentially, because sometimes you'll try to make a transparent fabric and then your outlines will get transparent and you'll be like, that doesn't look right, and then you'll have to copy and paste a second shape. The appearance panel solves a lot of those problems where you're adding more than one shape. So I have the basic flat template here. I downloaded it from our Moodle in some library on one of the weeks. I wish Moodle was organized a little bit easier sometimes. So we have this image and I wanted to introduce layers in Photoshop. So I'm going to find my layers panel. It might be in a different spot for you. And layers work a little bit different in Illustrator than they do in Photoshop. In Illustrator, you can make more than one shape on each layer, and you can move all of those shapes separately, and they're all still on this one layer. This is fine, but for something like the template layer, it can get really annoying if you do not put it on its own layer and then lock that layer. You can just lock the object, but sometimes you'll want to lock other objects, and the only way to unlock objects is to unlock all of the objects, and then you would have to lock your background again. So it's easiest to make a new layer that you're going to draw on and then lock the template layer. I'm going to draw the basic t-shirt with the pen tool. It's easiest if you drag out a guide before you start drawing, and actually it's easiest if that guide is on the template layer. So I'm going to unlock the template layer, turn on my rulers, view, rulers, show rulers, and then clicking and dragging from the ruler on the left and releasing in the center drags out a vertical ruler, and if you click and drag on a horizontal ruler, you will get you'll get a horizontal guide. So I'm going to lock that layer again, and we are going to draw on layer 2. I'm going to draw, so I have the pen tool selected, but before I start drawing, I'm going to make sure that I have a black stroke and no fill. If you start drawing when you have fill, it can get really jarring really fast. So pen tool, clicking and dragging gets you a curve, an anchor point, and a handle, and this isn't actually the line that we're going to be drawing. The line that we're going to be drawing is this line that you can now see that's curvy and visible behind it. So the handle is telling the line that it wants to be a curve and go in this direction, and it's kind of saying, I'm putting this much force in this direction. So you can see that no matter where I click next, the beginning of the line is always going to the left because I clicked and dragged to the left. So then we click on the shoulder, and that does not get us a handle. It just gets us an anchor point, and anchor points with no handles are corner points with hard corners. So we're going to do another click here, and then I think one of the easiest ways to draw a shoulder seam, right now we're just going to draw the bodice and we're going to leave the arms for later. I think one of the easiest ways to draw a shoulder seam is to click and drag vertically downward, straight downward at this point that this particular template gives you, but at the middle of the armhole point. And then we're going to do another click at the end, come down to the bottom of the t-shirt and click, and then we're going to do a rounded corner, and we are going to end here. We only draw 1/2 of a flats. Generally, it's even a good place to start for asymmetrical flats is to make a symmetrical flat and then adjust from there so that things look even and balanced. So we now have a curve going that way, and the pen wants to continue, and the instinct would be to close the line or make a vertical line up the center, but we actually don't want to do that. We want this to be an open shape right now, and we are going to close it and make it into a closed shape later on. So I am going to hit enter to end this line, and now it is not, the pen is ready to make a new line. You can tell because it has a star next to it, but we are going to move to the black selection tool, and we are going to flip and join this shape. So right now, if I fill it with color, I'm going to make sure the fill is in the front, and then I'm going to choose a nice color. If we fill it with color and deselect, you can see that there is no black line in the middle. The only thing you can see there is the guide, but there's nothing there. It's an open shape. It's easiest if you make nice closed shapes in Illustrator, so we are going to flip it and close the shape. So if we go to Object, Transform, and Reflect, we can flip this, and we don't have to copy and paste it ahead of time. We can choose copy, and we will get a second shape flipped over the vertical axes. Copy, and then we can, if we hold shift while we move it over, we can move it over directly, and it will even snap kind of to the center line as long as you have smart guides on. So we are going to select the 2 anchor points here with the white selection tool. So I haven't reviewed the white selection tool, but it allows you to select individual anchor points. It's one of the more important tools because with it we can select the anchor points and move them and adjust and make changes to the lines and be very direct and handle our lines really easily. You can also adjust handles with the white selection tool and change the shape of the curve. So we can select these 2 anchor points by drawing a tiny box just around them. There they are. And we can tell that they are selected because they are filled with red, and the rest of these are not. You'll frequently accidentally select all of the anchor points on the page, and that has a much more dramatic effect when you try to average and join them. So we only need these 2 selected, and we're going to right click and choose average, and this is going to put both of the anchor points exactly on top of one another, and then right click join, and all of you will be familiar with that from class. And now this is one joined anchor point. It's still a corner anchor point. If we need it to be an anchor point, if we want any corner point to become a curve point, we come up to Convert and we choose Smooth. So we've selected it with the white selection tool, and it gives us the Convert option up in the Properties panel. It's not too important that this is a smoothing point, but we can do it just for fun so it doesn't move. The handles don't move separately anymore. They're joined together. This one as well, we are going to it's 2 separate anchor points right now. It's a little hard to tell, but we are going to choose select both of them with the white selection tool, right click average, it puts them both exactly on top of each other. If you don't do this, you end up with two anchor points down there and it's a hassle. Right click join. There we go. So here we have our t-shirt. We are going to make arms for it. This is just the bodice of our t-shirt. Let's make an arm. For arms, I like to use the layer stacking function of Illustrator, but a lot of you might be coping with this by using like the paint buckets, the paint bucket tool in Illustrator. So for the arm, I'm going to make a long sleeve arm, and we're going to do a curve at the bottom of the arm, like we have a curve at the bottom of the shirt. You can just go straight across, that's fine, but a little curve can be nice. So if I want, right now my line is always going to be straight because there's no handle on this anchor. If I want to add a handle to an anchor, I can click and drag on the anchor with the pen tool, and now I have a curved handle. So same thing here. Let me hit Control Z. If we click and drag, and we still have a curve over here, and we want this to be straight, we give this curve point one click, and now it doesn't have a handle on this side, and we can come and make a straight line all the way up. So from here, you can see that I was drawing with fill, which wasn't bothering me, but you might have been noticing that it was filling with straight lines in between the endpoints, and that's what it does with closed shapes, right? Back here, it filled with a straight line between this point and that endpoint, and here we still have that straight line there. So that's not ideal. We never want to have a line that does not, we never want to have a soft line. We always in flats want to have hard lines with black outlines. It's not appropriate for flats to have lines. It's not appropriate for flats to have spaces that end like this with no line on them, right? Let me show you without the underground layer. See, this is not representing the edge of a seam, like some of you might say, like, oh, that's just a gap. These should always, if you were going to represent kind of a peekaboo shoulder with a gap there, you would have to close the shape like this, where there's a black line there. I don't want to do that. I want to make a traditional t-shirt sleeve, so I am actually going to draw a really sloppy sleeve. I'm going to come like way over here and be like, ha, somewhere, anywhere over there. I just drew a curve point. And then I'm going to come back to the anchor point and close it. So I've got a nice closed shape, and what I can do is I can right click arrange send to back, or object arrange send to back, and this sends that image to the back of the stack, right? Illustrator works by stacking objects on top of each other. If you expand the layers, which I don't often do, but you can see that each of these objects it's represented that it's selected with this little box. Each of these objects has their own little symbol here, and I'm hitting Control Z so everything is still perfectly lined up. We could restack this way, but it's a lot easier, especially when you're working with lots and lots of shapes, to just right click arrange send to back. Even send backward and bring forward, those aren't as 100% effective as like send to back is going to be for getting things all the way behind all the other objects on the layer. So let's reflect this sleeve. Object transform reflect, and we're going to hit copy. It's reflecting over the vertical axes, and I'm holding shift as I'm sliding it over. There we go. Let's turn on our template layer again. So here we have our basic t-shirt. We are going to make a back of it, and then we're going to make a collar for it really quick. To make the back, I'm lowering the front neckline a little bit because it wasn't looking super natural up there, and I'm going to go to Edit, Copy. The most efficient way to make a back is to then go to Edit, Paste in Back, and now there are two shapes here. We can actually open this up and see that there are two bodice shapes, and if we switch to the white selection tool, we can, without deselecting or anything, if we switch to the white selection tool, we can see that the shape we have selected is actually the shape that's underneath the front bodice. So we can click once on this anchor point and then click and drag upwards. Right. If you have an object selected, like if I want to lower the front neckline of this, if I have an object selected with the black selection tool and I switch to the white selection tool and I just go to click and drag, it's going to move the whole shape. So you should get into the habit of clicking and then clicking and dragging. So this is the front view of the t-shirt, where we can see the front and the back, and generally we fill the backs with a medium gray to represent that that's a different layer of fabric. I'm going to copy this. I'm holding Alt and Shift, which is keeping this copy in line and making a copy automatically while I'm clicking and dragging. You can also just go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste with the black selection tool. And for the back view, we actually can delete the front entirely, and we are going to make this the same color as this. If you use the eyedropper tool, the eyedropper tool will copy not only the color, but also the line color and the line thickness. So keep that in mind, but that has the same, this has all the properties I want, the correct line color and the correct line thickness. So this is the back view, and let's make a collar really quick. My favorite way to make a t-shirt collar actually introduces copying and pasting anchor point segments. If we select this anchor point, we can hit Control C and Control V, and we will see that it did not copy and paste just the anchor point alone, but it copied and pasted the line segments on either side. So if you copy and paste with the white selection tool, you can copy and paste anchor points to get both line segments, or you can just select one line segment and choose copy and paste, and you would get just this one line segment. So I'm going to fill this with no fill, it's just stroke, and we're also going to copy and paste the back. I'm actually going to go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste in front. And this is now lined up exactly, so if I hold Shift as I'm moving it upwards, I know it's still perfectly in line. And I'm going to remove the fill from that. So we are going to use outline stroke in order to make a quick band collar for this t-shirt. So Object, Path, Outline Stroke. Actually, Object, Path, Offset Path. We're using Offset Path in order to create a quick band collar for this shirt. Let's check preview so we can see what it's going to look like. That's obviously too thick, so let's try lowering it. Okay, so let's try typing in 0.1. This is going to depend on the size you are drawing at. The size you're drawing at, you should keep it consistent across a collection, but it matters a lot less in Illustrator than it does in Photoshop. 0.05. Okay, that looks good to me. It might be a different number for you that looks good. I'm going to hit OK, and this draws paths outside of the other shapes. Now we are going to try to get them lined up again. So we select both of them, and if you start on an anchor point, and you click and drag with the black selection tool, when you line up with an anchor point, it will turn white. So I know that I am snapping to the matching anchor point there, and I can release. We're going to do the same thing for this one. Select both the shapes, and then I'm looking for it to turn white, the black selection tool to turn white. So I know it's snapping to that anchor point, and I can release. So those are now matching anchor points in the center, and we just have to adjust the edge shapes to match. So I'm just going to use, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to use the white selection tool and adjust these anchor points until they match. And then we also can adjust, the upper anchor points. And then you can delete that extra line that you have in the center. There's still a line visible because the back and the front bodice shapes are there. And we are going to fill these shapes with probably the same color as the shirt. And then there's just a stacking issue where the back is not in the right spot. So I'm going to go to right click, arrange, send to back. Yeah, and that's pretty good. That's probably what it would look like. Or if you want this to be in the back, it honestly depends on the construction of the shirt. You can do either one. I think that probably looks better. So we are going to just copy this over to the back. If I hold Alt and Shift at the same time, looks good. Select all of the other shapes and send them to the back. And there we have the front view and the back view of our basic t-shirt. We are going to draw an A-line dress using the Curvature tool. It's the one that you'll accidentally click sometimes when you're aiming for the pen tool. I don't frequently draw with it, but I know that a lot of students prefer it. The way that I've found that it works best is actually to draw kind of 2/3 of a garment. So I'm going to make a new layer, and I moved my t-shirts over, and I'm going to lock them. Okay, so now I'm on layer 3. It's the one that's highlighted, and I'm going to start drawing. Actually, so we want that to be on the upper shoulder, and the Curvature tool keeps making curve points unless you tell it otherwise to. So there's no clicking and dragging with the Curvature tool. That actually moves the anchor point itself. In order to make a straight line, you double click on the point, and then this becomes a corner anchor point. And if I make another point down here, see the green line is the line that will change. It will actually change my shoulder too if I make another point down here. So I need to double click on that point again. And then this point is okay to be a curve point, so we just click and we make our next point. But this should be a corner point, so it gets double clicked. And I'm going to double click on this one as well, and we will get into our A-line skirt. So I'll put one here and here. And this is the corner point, the edge of the dress. Give that a double click, one point in the center, and then I'm going to come up and try to match to that point. So I'm going to hit escape to end the tool or switch tools, and we are going to reflect this object, transform, reflect, and for this one I'm holding shift so it'll still be aligned, but on this one I'm going to delete the neckline and the hemline. So you can delete anchor points using the white selection tool, and just selected them and delete, and it deletes them and the line segment on either side of them. So choose that guy. And notice that even though we drew these with a different tool, these shapes have become traditional Bezier curves with handles and anchors. So let's get this lined up again. And then I'm going to select these unjoined parts, right click average, right click join. Let's try to get this a little bit closer first. Beautiful. This bottom of the skirt doesn't look very realistic, so we are going to add anchor points to it and add wavy fullness and fullness lines going straight up. So I'm going to grab the pen tool, and right now there's only this anchor point and then an anchor point at either end of the hem. And I'm going to add 3 more anchor points on either side. And when you hover over a selected line, it will automatically add anchor points. See, the pen will get a plus next to it, and then it's ready to add an anchor point. And each of these anchor points we turn sideways. I'm turning them all clockwise, but it's okay to swap directions sometimes to add interest, or you can have them all going in the same direction. And then I'm going to use the line segment tool, which is another drawing tool option, and draw these lines, all different heights coming up. Also, the height of this can depend on like where the fullness begins and ends. So let's give this a little fill. Make sure the fill is in the front. And we are going to make the back of this shirt, again, edit copy, edit paste in back, and then we know we have the backmost copy of this shirt selected, so we're going to switch to the direct selection tool without deselecting, choose the black neckline and raise it upwards. And we generally make the back of the shirts a medium gray, or the back of the garments medium gray. So let's make the back version of this really quick. Essentially, all we need to do is remove the front version. Let's add stitch lines to this garment. I'll take the color from that. First off, let's add stitch lines to this shirt. We can copy and paste, I locked this layer. We can copy and paste the center line segments of both of these. So I've selected the center anchor point, and I'm going to choose edits copy, edit paste in front. And it's good practice to make sure that your stitch lines don't have any fill on them. I had grouped them earlier and that was messing with stuff. So we don't want them to have any fill. I don't know why this one is still insisting on having fill. And then we can raise them up higher and we can adjust the dashed line of them, right? Your stroke panel, it might look like this at first, and you have to choose show options, and then we check dashed line. And working at this scale, I know that a 2-point dash and a 2-point gap is what looks good for me. But sometimes at other scales, it's like not quite big enough. Beautiful. And you could do the same thing for the bottom of the shirts, or if this were a double stitch line, it's easy enough just to duplicate the line. I held Alt and hit up once, and then released Alt and hit up again a couple times until I got the double stitch line. That's what you would use on knit fabrics. So let's add stitch lines to the bottom of the shirt. You can do the same thing, select all of the individual anchor points, but sometimes that's a hassle, and I've already drawn these lines. So another really, I don't know if it's quicker option is to copy and paste the background, or like the the silhouettes of the garments, not the details, and delete all the other anchor points. So I've selected them all with the white selection tool, and I'm hitting delete, and then removing the fill and making it a dashed line. And putting that back in place, it should line up almost perfectly, and you can go through and adjust the anchor points with the white selection tool so that they like hit exactly on the fullness lines, which I think is like just a good rule of thumb that they should hit there. And then you can copy and paste it to the back view. There we go. So I'm going to add a collar to this shirt, and we are going to do it what I think is maybe the simplest way. We need this little shape to be isolated on its own, and the fastest way to do that is with the shape builder tool. So I'm going to copy and paste this shirt, and I am going to use the shape builder tool and hold Alt and click on the main body of the shirt, and all I have left is the other part that was exposed of the back. So let's put that right there just for now, and we will use that again in a second. I'll make it orange so we remember. Now I'm going to draw the shape of the collar, both the front and the back of the collar. So I'm going to start on the center line and just draw half of it. Start up here. Okay, so let's flip and join this. I'll bring this to the front for now so you can get an idea of what it's going to look like. We could just leave this on the front filled with gray, or we can subtract. It's really up to you how you want to. So we could subtract this shape from the other shape. It's up to you how you want to address how you organize your shapes and draw. I'm going to flip this anyway. Transform, reflect, copy, slide it over. Yeah, that's probably good, and it's probably fine to grab the shape builder tool and subtract this. So now we have just the shape of the collar, and the last thing it needs is a tiny bit of this kind of action. It's also nice to use the pencil tool for things like that. We're going to make the back of the collar now, so I'm going to copy and paste it onto the back. I'm holding Alt to copy it while I drag it. And I'm going to select both of these and join them together with the shape builder tool, and then draw a line on them with the pen tool. I'm going to draw some pants really quick using a pencil tool and my Wacom pen. So I will start at the top of the shirt and I'm going to draw a straight line, and I am going to draw one segment at a time. When you try to draw the whole garment without lifting up your pencil tool, things just can get out of hand really quickly. So even though you're using the pencil tool, and these can lead to really like Illustrator or garments that are filled with the hand, we really want to be aiming to draw precise garments. That's what's appropriate for this class. We're supposed to be showing construction. So if you have the shape selected and you hover over the end of the segment, you can start a new segment. That's what that slash means. It means you will continue the segment. If you see a star next to it, that means it's going to start a fresh line. This means it will continue the line. We'll come down. And I'm going to draw a quick arc here. And I kind of had a little spaz moment there, but if you do, you can take a break in the middle of drawing and select any extra anchor points and delete them. And then if I need to, I can adjust this anchor point, make sure everything is right before I grab the pencil tool again and keep drawing. So you should be trying to draw extremely precisely. So pants, this is maybe going to be a controversial take, but since these are pants, I'm going to add a front seam, and we are going to close the shape entirely. So a little circle appeared next to my pencil tool, and that means that the shape closed. So let's reflect this. And I'm going to add a waistband. Let's add a waistband using a different tool, the rectangle tool. So I'm just going to make a rectangle that is the size of the garment, and then with the white selection tool we can adjust the anchor points. Let's add a fly. We'll start with a straight line, so a click and then a click, and then we will drag out a new anchor point to tell it that this next line is a curve. Let's add some hems at the bottom. Command C, Command F to paste them in place. Remove their fill as a good practice, just in case we try to change the color later on. And we'll make them dashed lines. For the back of the shirt, or sorry, the back of the pants, we will copy and paste. And really all we have to do is remove the fly, but what's nice and what I maybe haven't talked enough about are kind of movement lines. So to give the idea that there's more fullness on this section of the pant, we can do one of these moments, or you know, you can give it a few tries just to show that there's some extra room in the caboose. And we'll make it a nice thick and thin line so it looks really illustratory. This line can also be made thick to thin, which has a just a great effect. Right, so adding those kind of moments, making the legs look nice and full. These kind of things are what sets your garment apart in terms of fullness and depth. Oh, this front would need a straight line here too, actually, wouldn't it? That's where you get into it. And we'll just add a really basic button first off with a circle and an X. So I'm locking it to 45 degrees, and then I'm going to go to Edit, or Object, Transform, Reflect is the best way to do it, and we will hit Copy, and now we have a perfect little X. And we'll group the X and select the circle, and then if we choose horizontal align center and vertical align center, they will be perfectly aligned. And another thing I've seen is that people round the edge of those so they look more like they're going into the garments. And then we'll group the whole button together for fun. Here's our pants. So notions are details of garments that you can create a library of in some cases in order to access and reference. So the one that I've drawn for you the most is probably the zipper, but other notions include, buttons, toggles, belt loops, belts, bows, all kinds of things. So I thought we could really quickly, I'm going to throw these on their own layer and lock it, and we are going to use the shape builder tool to trace this image, or to turn this into a vector flat notion for our flats. So I'm going to use a bunch of shapes in order to build this. So let's start off with the end toggles and making that shape. I'm going to draw a circle, and actually if you hold Alt, the circle will draw from the center, so I can guesstimate the center of it, and I'm going to hold Shift, and let's draw with no fill right now. And now I'm going to draw a line straight through this. And we'll select both of them and use the shape builder tool, and I'm going to hold Alt and subtract these sections. You can also subtract lines with the Shape Builder tool. From here, I'm surprised it left this extra line behind. I was hoping that both of these corners would have one of these curvature tools. This one does not. Perhaps it would if I had split it at a different part. But that's no worry. We can just select this anchor point and make it into a smoothing anchor point and adjust. Okay, so either way, let's reflect this. Right click, transform, reflect, copy. And let's do the same thing in the center. I'm holding Alt so that the circle draws from its center outwards. And a little bit of an oblong circle, and we're going to grab 2 more circles. Let's fill this. Select all 3, and with the Shape Builder tool, and subtract. And then we'll do a rounded rectangle in the middle. And we can always make the corners a little pointier. Looks like it needs to be rotated a tiny bit. And we'll use, I think, rectangle tools to make these. And I will copy and rotate them. Let's send them to the back. Sometimes these things give me such a hard time. Use the rotate tool if that's how you want to play it. And last one. If we want to, we can add some movement to these. We can add anchor points to them. Make those anchor points smoothing anchor points. Oops. Right selection tool. And adjust. Beautiful. When I'm looking for a texture, I'm looking for something that looks like it might be seamless, which means we wouldn't be able to see any of the picture's lines in it. If I made a repeating pattern out of this image as is without any editing of this image, then there would be a shadowy part and a bright part. It doesn't mean that we can't use this image, but we'll get back to how to use it in a second. It's a lot easier and more direct to Illustrator to use an image that I think that this might be a seamless texture already. So I'm going to choose copy image and paste it in here. And it's really low quality at this size, but it's actually easiest if you know what size you want it to be. Like if I want this shirt or this, yeah, this shirt to actually be like this sweatery texture, then we can shrink it down to kind of the size we want it to show up on the shirt ahead of time. And that saves time later on. So we can go to Object, Pattern, Make. And this brings you into the pattern editing mode, and you don't have to worry about it too much. All you have to know is that it adds a swatch over here, and we can hit done. Let me unlock my t-shirt. So with the shape selected, we can now choose the pattern and apply the texture. Now let's make our own seamless texture, and you can do this either using your own photographs or other photographs you've grabbed from the internet. I'm going to copy this image, and we are actually going to move to Photoshop, which is the best place to work with pictures like this. You can choose Create New, and it will automatically offer you a clipboard-sized image in your recent items, and this should also match the size over here. And this is what you have copied. So when I hit paste, this is the perfect size for this image. I didn't notice this image actually has a watermark on it. I didn't want to use that copywritten image, so I used an image of my own textile sample here. This image starts a little bit too big, and we want to crop it to a section that looks really evenly lit all the way across anyway. That's what's easiest. So I'm going to choose crop in Photoshop, and you want to make sure that delete cropped pixels is checked, and we'll crop it down significantly. And enter. So right now, if we defined this as a pattern, it would be maybe close to seamless, I don't know, but there would certainly be vertical lines going through it because the lines going left to right won't line up as easily. So we are going to go to, with the background selected, filter other offsets, and you can see that it moves the image over, and if wraparound is checked, if set to background is checked, it just moves the image over. If wraparound is checked, as the image moves off one edge of the page, it moves on to the other. So this is great for our purposes because it means that the edges will now be seamless. And you can actually click and drag that center cross to the very center of the page. And when you release, it shows up. Then I'm going to move to a selection tool. And I don't want to change any of the edge pixels, but I can use any tool in order to adjust the interior space. One of my favorites is to just select across and then go to Edit, Fill after we select it. So basically this cross is just selecting the seam of the photograph. If it were going to be a repeating pattern, this is the seam of it. We can choose Edit, Fill, and then Fill has a content aware option. And let's hit OK, and the computer is going to try to generate a more seamless texture through those areas. And it did a great job. You can also use the clone tool or any other tool to kind of, fix spots. Like this spot looks a little bit blotchy. I could grab the clone tool, select an area that I want to replace with, and then copy them over here. As long as you aren't touching the edge pixels at all, this will remain a seamless pattern. So we are going to go to File, Save, and save this as a JPEG, or actually I think we can copy and paste it from here. So I'm going to select everything, select all, or Control A, copy, and let's move back to Illustrator. Yeah, it's huge, so I'm going to shrink it down a lot before I define it as a pattern. Now we can go to Object, Pattern, Make. And we would be able to apply it to any shape. So this can be a great way to enhance a collection, is to add lots of really sumptuous textures. Last week we learned how to make a few simple brushes, or we reviewed how to make a few simple brushes, but we're going to make a slightly more complicated one this time. We're going to make a ruffle brush kind of similar to one of these, using the pencil tool. So all brushes need to be designed going horizontally. I'm going to draw a few moments like this. Let's see, yeah. And then I'm going to grab a smaller brush and start putting in these. Let's make these taper at the ends. And we are going to make this into a seamless repeat, a loose seamless repeat. We're just going to make sure that it doesn't fight with itself too much. I'm going to copy and paste it over here. We'll draw a joining line. And if we needed to, we could draw more of these little guys. All right, select anything that we just added, and I'm going to copy and paste it and slide it over until it's snapping to the same space over here. So now we need a bounding box. Well, let's draw a line at the bottom. I'm just going to line these up. You might remember bounding boxes from making repeating patterns. They are boxes with no fill and no stroke. I'm going to draw a rectangle, and it is going to start and end at the same anchor point in both sections of this pattern. Let me redraw it just to make sure. Perfect. Then we're going to have no fill and no stroke, and it has to be the backmost thing in the stack. And that is going to tell Illustrator, we want this image to be cropped exactly to this section. And we actually don't need any of the extra bits, but it actually won't matter if they're there or not. Because it should be that this is the only section that matters. So let's select it and go to the brush panel, and we're going to choose new brush. And we choose new pattern brush. And that's looking pretty seamless to me in this tiny preview they give you. And we want 0% spacing. It should be all cropped to the bounding box. And you can hit OK. And let's draw a new line and try applying it. There we go. So we can add ruffles to any like dress or collar or whatever we want. And they will follow the path of the garments. Let's flip these, and it probably would have been better if we defined the pattern without the extra long bits on the end. Seems like it wants that's like that, and this like this, and that'll probably make the cleanest pattern. So once you have made, your symbol library, your brush library, and all of your swatches, how do you save them? How do you manage those files? All of the panels we've discussed, or a lot of the panels we've discussed, have this little library menu. So your patterns are saved in the swatches menu, and they are saved in your library. And if you want to, you can, it's probably good to remove all of the random swatches before you save. And then if I want access to these later, I can choose from any computer or from any file, not from any computer, but from any file on this computer. I can choose this little library menu, choose Save Swatches, and where it automatically opens is the appropriate place for you to save it, especially if you are the only one, like if you're only working on one computer, this is where you should save it. If you are working on another computer, you can save this to another spot and then load it back into the swatches panel, but it's easiest just to save it here. So if we wanted to, I could call this knit textures. And then if we needed to access that again, we can go to user defined and choose knit textures, and it opens up here. I have one other user defined one, which is just some colors in it actually. So you can save fabric textures, or you can save colors in there, or your own patterns that you've designed, anything like that. The brush panel has the same situation going on. It's got a library panel. Let's delete all of the ones that I don't like. And These brushes are saved in here. We don't have to do anything with these lines, just like we don't have to do anything with these images. We can just choose the library panel and choose Save Brushes. We can call them fashion brushes or whatever. I've already saved all the brushes that I want to on my personal computer. But if we go to user defined and choose fashion brushes, you can see all of the different types of brushes I have. Symbols, same thing. This is your symbol panel. Symbols are great because you can update all of the symbols in a project at the same time. If I decided I wanted to put a whole bunch of these on the garments, it might be good to define it as a symbol first, and then drag that symbol out. And then if I just change one of the symbols, I can come up to Edit Symbol, and it gives me a little warning dialog. If I change anything on one of them, we will just change the color. It will change on all of them. So now they all have one green. So you can load a whole bunch of symbols in here, and then we'll also add the button. You want to make, I think a static symbol is better, but the other symbol worked too. And we can choose to save this library. And then we can access it again. There are, those are the three main panels that I know of that allow you to save libraries. But my favorite way to save libraries is actually through the Adobe Creative Cloud library, because with this, if you went and logged on at a school computer, you would still have access to all of these. So for example, what would be great is for me to pop my shirts and my dresses into this little library I have here, all of which fit the female croquis. So I'm going to unlock my layers. And we will choose New, Graphic, and there we have her. Let's remove the texture from this and add this one. Right, so then I can hold, it's easiest if you hold Alt at the beginning, and then they will automatically be editable vector files. If you drag one of these out and you don't hold Alt, they get this X through them, and you have to hit Embed before you can edit it, and it's just a little bit more of a hassle. Also, things get messed up. Things just act really weird, so you have to hold Alt while you drag them out, and they're still editable vector files. But this is a great resource. I use these starting points all the time. So if you're paying for the Creative Cloud library, or if this is offered to you through the school libraries or the school logon option, it didn't seem like it was when we were at campus, but maybe it is now. It's really handy for moving back and forth between computers. If you do have the luxury of working on your own computer all the time, which maybe you do now, using these libraries is handy. Like, I definitely do love that I have this user-defined fashion brushes library in here that I can just access whenever I need a special stitch or whatever. But I also have access to this as long as I'm using the same consistent login.